Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cracking Addiction. My name's Dr. Fergal Armstrong, and today we have with us a very special guest, Tom Jenkins. Now, Tom is the author of the book, The Drunk Gambler with Erectile Dysfunction. Tom, welcome to the show. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very good, thank you, and delighted to be here and have this conversation.
Thanks for joining us. Now, I have to say, that's a very provocative title. Where did you get the courage to actually call your book, which is the story of your journey through life, really, that title? Where did you get the courage?
Yeah, sort of as we just talked about, call a spade a spade. And what I like about it is the metaphor. I'm an open book now. It's, everything that I've done in my life is written on a piece of paper. And, it's a book that as an 18-year-old, when I was messed up and making a lot of very bad decisions, I sort of wrote it for my younger self, but not just for my younger self, but I know I'm not the only one. I know there are a lot of younger people and, even middle-aged and older people as well, struggling with these same topics, drinking, drugs, sexual problems as well. So I just
Yeah.
wanted to make it as clear as possible and get it out there and hopefully it can help people who are struggling with similar things to I was.
That's a very good point, actually. I define addiction sometimes for people as a connection to one's past which doesn't serve us instead of having a connection to our future. And I ask people, what would your future self say to your past self? And you've just said that that's the book that you wrote. It's your future self speaking to your past self, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly that. And it's a funny one because I had to live that journey. I'm sure you've heard this a lot.
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
much as I'd love to go back and change some things because, I hurt some people and I hurt myself along
Mm,
the way. But now I'm living a clean, good, confident, passionate life. I realized to actually get to this stage, I had to go through all of that. Although it's not necessary, it could have been done with a better way if I'd had the better tools, which I'm hopefully trying to give people, if they
mm.
relate to it. But hey, that's how my story was.
Right. So, well, this begs the question then. Tell us about your journey. What was it like for you going through the pain and the suffering that you experienced, first of all? What was going on then
Yeah,
for you?
well, it all came from a huge amount of lack of self-confidence, self-worth. I mean, I can't pinpoint exactly where that came from. I just think it sort of developed through time. And, I came from a good background, a good family, sort of had, the upbringing that everyone would want to have, but I never really connected with school. When I began to hit the teenage years, sort of, I just became shyer and more nervous. My comfort zone was the size of I don't know, a piece of corn, like as small as it could possibly be. And, my addiction stories, if I stayed within that comfort zone, if I stayed in, I wasn't like a Monday to Friday drinking every day type of drinker or gambler. I was the kind of guy that if I stepped out my comfort zone, which meant going to a party, going to a bar, going to a restaurant, I mean, any situation where, drinking or other people were there, I was the kind of person who I didn't have a stop switch, a British or Australian style binge drinker. And I would always be the guy who'd end up in the corner, throwing up on the floor or making a fool of themselves. And, through time, it's like the snowball effect. Well, then I'd get up in the morning and have even less confidence and be even more embarrassed about what I did. So I'd dive deeper into the drinking, into the gambling, and I could occasionally stop it, with pure discipline of stone cold. Well, I don't want to go out because I know where that ends up, but I don't want to stay in because I'm lonely and I still don't feel good about myself. So,
Mm,
sort of snaking through those. I've woken up on street corners, stairwells, lost my phone and wallet. I don't even know how many times, and stolen, drunken, thrown stuff around hostel and hotel rooms and, all of that kind of thing. So just a load of stupid self-inflicted decisions that cover up an incredible amount of lack of self-worth.
So what I'm hearing then is that at that stage in your life, alcohol was a tool for you to manage social anxiety. And underneath that social anxiety, you still had this drive to seek connection.
Yeah, I mean, I knew I wanted more, and I never let that flame burn out. Um, and connection I always
Mm,
struggled with. Big part of my journey is my sexual struggles, that didn't really begin
yeah,
until I was 22. But yeah, I always wanted to be with somebody. I always wanted to have a girlfriend, but I just couldn't connect because with the opposite sex, I had zero self-confidence, and I was drinking and whatever else. So, if
mm,
ever there was, a desirable partner, well, I'd be so drunk, who'd want to be with me anyway? So, when it did come to sort of
yeah,
trying to get clean and exploring that sexual journey as well, I was just completely ill equipped to do it. I mean, my sexual education came from porn, which is the worst sexual education,
yeah,
in my opinion, anyone can have. And
yeah,
unfortunately, I think that's the main sexual education many people do have. So, yeah, erectile dysfunction was just a big part of my journey and my struggles as well. Eventually, I turned to Cialis, a
yeah,
product similar to Viagra, to overcome it. Not something I condone or don't
yeah.
condone. That's just my story. Until eventually, in I say as a 30-year-old, I'm now 37, I really began to sort of dive deep inside myself to actually begin to uncover what was, core, get to the root of this just complete lack of self-confidence.
Before we get to the moment of your journey of recovery, really, what was the worst? What was the deepest, worst moment that made you realize things had to change? What was your turning point? Your
Yeah,
rock bottom?
it's exactly where I start the book from, basically. Um, so as you said, I was functional. I could hold down a job, I could work, I could get up in the morning, have a shower, eat some mints, and I could also leave the alcohol and I could leave the gambling for a period of time. And then I'd throw back in and explode anyway. So I ended up with a friend. I've always connected with Latin America. I live in Colombia now, but we were in Brazil. We went to a favela. Favela is sort of a Brazilian term for shanty town, full of amazing people, amazing communities, but also a small percentage of drug violence and gang wars. Anyway, we ended up going with a guy who knew a guy, nothing organized, who was connected to this world. And we ended up in houses full of cocaine and drugs. I'd never tried cocaine at this point. It was my first time, a 20-year-old. And like all other things, once I began, I didn't want to stop. We're with some people who luckily decided, well, it's time to get back to the hostel now. So they managed to sort of get us in a taxi, got back to the hostel. I mean, we were drinking as well. I ended up, I don't know how, more and more drink, more and more drugs. I threw a load of stuff around the hostel room, some mine, some not. Angered a lot of people. We were leaving and flying back to the UK the next day, hadn't paid the bill. Um, so embarrassed to look anyone in the eye. And we also decided, well, we were going to sneak out the hostel without even paying our bill. So then you've got a 12-hour flight back to London. Um, After drinking, after drugs, after stealing. And at this point, it was a couple of days later, I was just feeling worse than ever. And I just thought,
Mm,
this has to stop and this has to
this has to
change
stop.
now.
Yeah,
So that was the low. There were other slip
yeah.
ups and things after that, but that was the point where things
That
began
was
to
the
move
point.
up.
Sure. So, I mean, I think that a lot of men can identify with the low point in a life. It might not necessarily be the same details, the same story, but there's always an inflection point when you think, I've had enough, I've got to change. How did you change? Tell us your journey.
It's a funny one because I came across a self-help book, and this was back in, I think, 2008, 2009, and the industry wasn't that big at this time. But I was sat outside a bookshop and I just saw it. And it pulled me in and I bought it. It was by Robin Sharma. It was like lessons of a monk who sold his Ferrari. Now I forget exactly, but at that
Well,
point,
I used to read The Monk That Sold His Ferrari when I was younger, avidly.
yeah,
Robin
yeah,
Sharma is
no,
one of my personal heroes.
it's a fantastic book, and I love him. And
Yeah,
at the time of my
yeah,
ultimate low, it sort of gave me 100 steps to
yeah,
try and make a change. Like, be nice to strangers, eat well, exercise, the basics. But it's often the
yeah.
basics of life that you forget. And I had to connect back to that. And with the faith and with that conviction and that decision, it was more that decision. I am not going back now. Now I slipped up, I'll go into that more in the book. But after that point, the drive was there. And with the steps, I began to make some real good changes. Now, I went more and more into self help books. Now, I think they helped a lot of people. I'm not here to knock anything, they helped me massively. But I
Yeah.
also got lost in a bit of reading book after book, having more and more questions than answers. And I don't think, for me at least, they ever took me to the real root of the problem, though I'll be forever thankful to that book. Because in my worst time, it just at least gave me a guide work to go from.
So, what was the real root of your problem?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great. I'd love to be able to say this is it. Now, I don't know exactly. I was never a big fan of school. Um, as much as I grew up in the perfect idyllic environment in inverted commas, I'd always been shy and struggled to connect with people. The root, I don't know why again. And then, you add the drink, the drugs, the sexual struggles on top, and you're just getting that snowball again. I mean, the thing that ultimately helped me get to the root of the problem massively as well for me is psychedelics and ayahuasca, which is a bit controversial given that I'm talking about problems with drugs, and then maybe some people associate this with drugs. Now, it was done in a controlled environment with medical professionals who were certified by indigenous traditions in a very responsible way. Now, I can't, tell is maybe not for everyone. I can't condone it or not, but for me, it was a phenomenal experience that really helped me sort of, it's hard to describe with words, but look from a different plane, sort of look from the outside in, sort of as in Buddhist or Eastern philosophy, sort of as the witness, looking
Mm,
back on some of the events of my life and reliving them. And in that process, sort of the coming from the witness, being able to look and forgive my past and come to accept those decisions and accept that from there forward, I forgive myself and I move forwards and sort of start with a clean slate. Now, it wasn't a magic bullet, you have to go and make changes. And, I had to improve my diet, I changed my job,
mm.
I changed my living situation and all these other things on top. And then it was sort of, instead of the snowball effect down, well, then we're talking about the snowball effect up. If you eat better, you have more energy to exercise, so you sleep better, so you have more time to, focus on your passions. And, it began to come upwards again.
Once you are able to forgive yourself, you were then able to move on and start that journey of repairing yourself. So, what I'm hearing is that forgiveness must come first. Forgiveness of yourself must come first before you start really engaging in a process of change.
Yeah, 100% for me. I think the first thing was that decision, that real commitment.
Mhm.
I think we've all, anyone who's had problems with drinking and drugs or whatever else it may be, had those thoughts of, I can't do this anymore. I'm
Yeah,
not doing it anymore, but they haven't really come from that faithful conviction. And then a week later, you fall back in there.
yeah,
But for me, there just came a point of this conviction and this faith that day, that story after the Brazil story of no more. And this really means no more.
yeah.
Now, as I say, I did slip up, but I never fell back to where I was before. And that conviction remains. So for me, that decision is number one. And then, on top of that, you need to get honest with yourself and with the people around you of what you're struggling with. And you need to begin to forgive, accept what's been done. We can't change the past. I had to live those stories. sometimes it's, well, maybe I wish I hadn't, but that's not going to change anything. All I can do now is forgive and accept what's done, and um, the present and the future ahead of me is there to create something better.
So here's a question for you. Could you have achieved the wisdom that you've achieved now, and could you help the people that you're helping now without having gone through your life experience and the suffering that you experienced?
No, no, 100% not. I had to do it, and I had to go through that.
Mm.
And, that's kind of the part the reason why I write it, as I shared at the start.
Yeah,
It was a cathartic process as
yeah.
well. It's another chance to look back, but not look back from a place of judgment, but from a
Mhm.
place of just accepting, well, this is what it was. And I know so many other people are struggling with these issues. And if I'd had this book when I was younger, I would have realized I felt like I was alone. I felt like I was the only one. But, now looking back, I know so many others around me were experiencing the same.
Yeah.
And I can see so many other people who still are now.
So one of my great passions in life is recovery, and I believe firmly that connection, deep connection, social connection is an absolute keystone in the recovery process. What would you say to that?
Yeah, 100%. You kind of look, I'm sure you've discussed or looked into blue zones before, social
Mm.
connections, like the key to longevity and
Yes.
happiness. And
Yes.
for me, there's negative social connections and positive social connections. And I had a lot of good people around me. I don't want to say I was in the wrong environment, but yeah, there were some people and some things I had to leave. So, I
Mm.
realized that, and I made changes,
Yeah.
and with the people I was hanging around, some of them, and that was a big change to the negative side. But then, looking to the positive as well, when I had to connect again with my family, and get honest with my family and the people who are closest to me, to then begin to form connections that, well, if you try and stop drinking and you're still going to the pub every Friday trying to drink a glass of water or an orange juice or whatever, it gets difficult.
It
So
does. Yeah.
you sort of have to make changes in a positive way to form those connections in different environments. Now, my family have always been sports people. So, that was and a lot of my friends were as well. So that was quite an easy shift for me. And, it gave something to do apart from going to the pub. And, I had
Mm.
more time, more energy, more money. I could use it towards positive things that I enjoyed doing rather than the negative things that were very self-destructive.
So do you think that life is harder now for people, for young people, compared to when you were younger, or for that matter, compared to when I was younger? 'Cause I'm pretty sure I'm older than you. Is life getting harder, do you reckon?
I think there's been a big change. I think the younger generation now, I don't know the data behind this, it's just what I
Yeah.
seem to observe, seem to be turning more away from alcohol and drugs. Now, alcohol, it can be a positive thing. I'm almost trying to, a lot of people who can have a drink or two here or there and have a great time. But a lot of people are turning away from sort of the negative ways that I went about it. Now, the worrying thing for me is the technology and the social media and TikTok,
Mm.
Instagram that are taking over. I don't know what's better or worse because I see more and more young people getting lost in that. And
Uh-huh.
speaking of the social connection, at least if you're going to the pub and drinking, now it may not have always been positive for me, but at least you're with other people. As I think the younger generation, just being with them and their head in their phone.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's better or worse or not,
Mm.
but that's what worries me a little these days.
So what message of hope would you give to somebody, watching this or listening to this, apart from read the book? What message of hope would you give?
I'd say the first thing is you are not alone. I felt like I was alone. I felt like, especially with the erectile dysfunction stuff, I think, people see a lot of drinking and gambling books or, stories out there and, they can really help you. But
Uh,
there's less on the sexual side. You're not alone. A lot of other people are going through this. There's also so many resources for help. You know, this podcast, so many other podcasts, different books, different groups, different forums that you can reach out to. That there's more than ever these days. And the others, there's so many stories of people turning it round. You know, now I don't struggle at all with that, not using any Cialis, Viagra or anything. And
Mm.
if I can, yeah, I'm sure we've heard this before, but if I can turn it around, so can you, and so can anyone, you know, me, you, whoever else listening to this. We're all, you know, we're all human and we're all the same and we've all got our own unique problems and, you know, we can all help each other overcome them. So have that conviction, have that belief, get honest with yourself, forgive. If you slip up, it doesn't mean you have to go back to square one. You know, you can stand up quicker each time and just believe and have faith, most importantly in yourself.
Forgive yourself. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah,
Forgive
love
yourself.
it.
Tom, we're going to have to wrap it up, but it's been an absolute pleasure to hear your pearls of wisdom. I really appreciate the time you've given us today. Thank you.
Likewise, enjoyed it. Thank you.
That's all for today, folks. I'm Dr. Fergal Armstrong, and this has been Cracking Addiction.